So what's up YouTube? In today's video, we're going to get into should you work for a large company or a small company? My name is Kenny G. For those who don't know, I'm an iOS engineer. I'm more so of a software engineer. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Also hit the like button. It helps out the channel. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. So as a software engineer, you're probably wondering, should I work for a large company or a small company? You're not really sure. I'm going to weigh the pros and cons of working for each, because I've worked for a large company, or I guess you say a mid-sized company, which is Carvana, and I work for small companies like, almost like a startup for the most part. So first things first, we're gonna start with the small companies, because I feel like that's probably the easiest to go with, and we can kind of go forward from there. So with the small companies, the biggest thing I will say, you're gonna be given a lot more tasks versus if you work for a larger company. So some of those things, maybe, features that you're gonna be worked on are gonna be pretty big, as well as the fact that with a smaller company, you're probably not going to get paid as much as those larger tech companies. And the larger tech companies I'm looking at will be more so like those FANG companies. And for those who don't know FANG, I'm meaning like Google, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, those companies. So salary-wise, if you work for a small company, say you're a junior developer, just graduated college, or just came out of boot camp, the salary you're probably gonna be looking at would probably be around like between 70 and 90K. That's just giving the ballpark range. So if having a base salary around 70 to 90K, you may get a package deal with being hired and you may not. It just all depends. Some smaller companies probably don't have the budget to do like a whole package deal type of ordeal. Whereas if you work for somewhere like Google and you just graduated from a boot camp, college or so forth, your total base package as a junior developer, which would be like an L3, will be somewhere probably like around the range of say like 150, maybe 200K, it just depends. So if you're thinking like, man, that's a huge difference in pay, granted it is, but you gotta look at also the leaps and bounds that most people go through to get hired at some of these larger tech companies. Not to say that it's super easy to get hired at the smaller tech companies, but the smaller tech companies, their budget isn't as big as say those larger tech companies. So there is a little gap in difference, as well as those interviews, they're not as difficult as those interviews that you'll probably have to go through if you decided to work for like Google or Amazon or Apple or something like that. Now, here's the bigger difference that I've noticed personally from working with those larger to mid-size, I'll say large tech companies versus small tech companies. And I've gotten this information about the large tech companies from a couple of my friends that have worked at some of these companies. The big difference is the fact that if you work for a large tech company, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be pretty much focused in one particular niche. And what I mean by that, say that, you're a iOS engineer, or say you're a web developer, you may only work on one particular feature versus a ton of features. So say you work for Google, you may work on just Google Maps, and you may work on a particular section in Google Maps, and that's it. Whereas if you work for some of those smaller tech companies, the smaller tech companies, they may have an application that they need a ton of features added to it. So because of that, you're gonna get a whole lot of knowledge around a bunch of different areas around tech, as far as whatever your expertise is in. So say you're a Java developer and you're working on an application for your company, you may work on maps, you may work on being able to download data, you may be working on uploading data, you may be working on saving data to the database in different ways. You also may work on a little bit of UI, you may work on some back end, you may get a plethora of information around the application you worked on, and the features you're going to be touching will be all over the application. It won't be in one particular area. Whereas if you work somewhere like Google, you may only be able to work on just one particular area. Now granted, over time, you may be able to say like, hey, I don't want to work on this particular feature anymore. I would like to move to different features. And from there, they will be able to, accommodate you on that and see if there's a way to move you from one feature to a different feature, which will be a completely different team. But that's typically how it works for the most part. So just to think about it from the hindsight is, if you're someone who's pretty much new to programming and you're trying to decide on if you should go with a large tech company or a small tech company, the big thing I would say is the pay is a big difference, as well as what you actually touch. So someone who is working for like Google or some of those top tech companies, they may not be able to touch all parts of the entire application because the company is so large. I've seen it firsthand that, some of those projects that I've looked at too, you won't be able to work on everything, but you can work on different portions of the application. And again, they have very specific teams set up for that. Another big thing if you work for large tech companies is the fact that there's a lot of red tape around what you can and can't do as far as different parts of the application as a whole. So they may have a specific way in how they want things to be uploaded, especially how they want to actually release the app to the App Store if you're working on iOS or Android, or they may have a different type of release process that they go through as far as releasing the application to users. Whereas if you work for a small tech company, just being honest with you, that process of red tape is probably not there. They may have specific individuals to just go ahead and do a release, or they may have everyone on the team handle the release, but there's not as much red tape. It's agreement probably among the team or the company itself on deciding if they want to do a release, say every 2 weeks, every month, every quarter, so forth from there. Whereas if you work for large tech companies, they may have very, very strict ways in which they want to handle releases because of the fact that any small impact to the application, they could lose a ton of money in the process. Whereas a smaller company, if something went wrong, they will lose money, but it's not as detrimental as someone like, say, Netflix, and someone doesn't release and say for some reason, like none of the movies show up. Like that's a big, big deal versus someone who works at a company where they may have just say shy around like 2 million users and something goes down. Obviously it's a big deal, but not as much of a big deal as say Netflix if there's no movie showing for say like an hour. Like that's a big problem. So things like that is pretty much the bigger difference in which I would say from a smaller company, from a larger company. For me personally, I do like both in both situations. So this is my personal opinion. If you're someone who just came out of a boot camp or graduated college, I think the best thing is to go with a smaller company first, just because you'll get a ton of knowledge around an application or how you can build out things in an application with the language of your choice. So for me, as an iOS engineer, if you graduate from a boot camp as an iOS engineer, Android, whatever, you can go into learning everything you need about iOS development in general or Android development. Whereas if you go to Google and you do iOS development, you may only work on very specific areas of iOS. Or say you go to Apple, you may work on say Swift UI and you may not be touching a full-blown application like you would if you graduated from a boot camp and went to a smaller tech company. So it varies from different companies as well as also the teams, because I'm saying this, but then you may have a specific team you work on where you do get the chance to work on a complete application at some of these larger tech companies. But in general, that's usually how it goes. So if you want to work for a smaller tech company, obviously they're a little bit easier to get into, as well as, the pay, just to be honest, it's not as much as you would get paid from Google, which is why so many people, push to go to like Apple, somewhere like that. But at the same time, you can learn a lot of information from those smaller companies. And what I say is, roll with the smaller companies first, get the knowledge you need. Then after that, it's much easier to go to those larger companies because you have an extensive amount of knowledge around whatever coding language you use or whatever stack that you're invested in, so that, you can move up in the company much easier. So with that being said, I just want to thank you guys for watching the video. Anyone who has any different opinions around things, please leave a comment below and we can chat it out from there. But I just want to thank you guys again for watching the video. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.